Well, right now we're still awaiting. Anybody who was inside the courtroom when the jury was coming in were not allowed to leave. We're going to get a reaction from Lori Perez, who's inside, once they are allowed to come out. You know, Logan, I was thinking as Andrew was talking about this being a trial and a case that people are going to be talking about for decades. You know, this has been going on. People may remember back to day one when they had the testimony of Mary Lyons, who's the bank manager at the Bank of America, and they showed Jennifer Hawke-Petit going into the bank, making that last plea to save her family's life. You had the following day, Dr. William Pettit taking the stand in an incredibly dramatic day of testimony. Following that, you had the Cheshire police captain going over that timeline that had so many people questioning, what if? Later on that day, the jury, for the first time, saw the pictures of the Pettit women, the pictures of the bodies. The reporters who were in that room that day, I don't think will ever forget it. There's a moment that I think anytime I've recollected it to people, that may be one of the saddest moments in my life, and that was the moment that the first juror saw the first picture. They weren't shown on a projector screen. They were shown in individual folders. I'm not sure anybody was breathing inside this courtroom at that time, and all I could hear was the actual pencil, the sketch artist 4 rows ahead of me. And all you heard was the slightest gasp by this woman juror. And Dr. William Pettit broke down. His father put his arm around him. His sister Hannah put his hand on his back. And this testimony went on for 2 more hours. It was absolutely grueling testimony for anybody inside. That was day 3. It has been now 7 weeks later, and the testimony has not gotten any easier through this. The penalty phase was a whole different tone, where the state really kind of led the witnesses that were on the stand during the trial. This has been the defense's opportunity to try to convince the jury to spare Stephen Hayes' life. One of the more dramatic moments that came in the penalty phase was when a letter was read by the state from Matthew Hayes, who was the brother of Stephen Hayes. Matthew lives out west. He's been lived out west for years. He was out west at the time of this crime. In that letter, he called his brother a monster. He was basically said that he had been taunted and teased and just brutalized by his brother for his whole life. The next day, the defense read a letter that Matthew Hayes had written to Stephen, basically saying, you know, I hope you get good with God. The law will be coming down on you. You're still my brother. But, you know, I hope that at some point you can get good with God through this. Then a day later, Matthew Hayes showed up. He showed up in the courtroom. When he came in the first day, nobody had seen him. Nobody knew who he was. Certainly by the time he left, he was getting chased down the street. Now, I had an opportunity. I was contacted by Matthew Hayes about 2 weeks before that happened. I wasn't quite sure if it was really him at first. We spoke, we emailed, he contacted me through Twitter. There were direct messages on that. He is somebody who was very articulate. Through this whole phase, Stephen Hayes has shown no emotion. Matthew Hayes is almost the anti-Stephen Hayes. He's a very articulate, very emotional guy, and very conflicted. Without getting into too much of what we had talked about, you know, he felt that he had an obligation as the eldest Hayes family member at this point to come and show support for his brother, a brother who he has felt that he had terrorized him throughout his whole life. He called him very manipulative. All the things that you had heard in that letter at that time, he basically he agreed with in our conversations. He ended up leaving yesterday, but from what I understand from him, he wrote one last final letter to his brother, saying that he was leaving, saying that he is happy that he came to see him, to show a little bit of support for him, no matter how horrific this crime. He was happy that he was able to show the support. The mother of Stephen and Matthew Hayes had passed away last year. Matthew felt that he had an obligation to see this trial through for his brother, and he did make this trip, as difficult as it was. And I can't imagine, we've been seeing this trial through the eyes of the Pettit family. I got a little bit of an idea to see it through a Hayes family member, and I can't imagine what's going on in his mind right now. Back to you.
All right. Thanks, George. Right now, we do want to read a statement that was released by Governor Jody Rell. This is what she says, quote, "The crimes that were committed on that brutal July night were so far out of the range of normal understanding that now, more than 3 years later, we still find it difficult to accept that they happened in one of our communities. I have long believed that there are certain crimes so heinous, so depraved, that society is best served by imposing the ultimate sanction on the criminal. Stephen Hayes stands convicted of such crimes. Today, the jury has recommended that he should be subjected to the death penalty. I agree. Once again, I must commend Dr. Petit and his extended family for the way that they have conducted themselves throughout this horrific period. I would also like to thank the jurors who served throughout the case, that they have seen and heard terrible things and faced extremely difficult choices. They have served with honor and deserve our appreciation. Again, this was just released, the statement by Governor Jody Rell.
Andrew Julian is here. And Andrew, I understand we're getting some tweets coming in from our reporters in the courtroom, right?
Yeah, one of our reporters, Helen Ubinis, has been tweeting throughout the trial and the death penalty phase. And what she's describing is a very subdued but very emotional scene inside the courtroom. She says the foreman is clasping hands with the juror sitting next to them. As the jury is right now, the jury is being polled one by one to confirm the verdict, and they're holding hands. They've been gripping each other during the reading of the verdict. She says that Dr. Petit, who was seated away from the media and was very quiet, and his father was wiping away tears. It seems there's a lot of crying going on in the courtroom, not a lot of noise. I haven't seen anything yet on how Hayes is reacting, except that he just appears to be sitting there looking straight ahead as the jury's reading the verdict.
Interesting. Yeah, this is one of the things where the attorneys can go down the line and ask each specific juror if that is their verdict, and they have to verbally answer yes, just to make sure that nobody is waffling on any of this, because if one person does, that's all it takes is for one of the 12, and it's not a unanimous verdict, and he wouldn't have gotten the death penalty.
And I think we can see by the jurors' reactions that this is a very arduous and difficult thing to do. I mean, to convict a man to death. We talk a lot about the law and all the details, but at the end of the day, they're doing what's very difficult, and we've read and written about the traumatic feelings that jurors have afterwards. I think a lot of these people could be looking at this down the road, and you're seeing the emotion sort of breaking through right now.
One can only imagine how much they've gone through, pictures, evidence, everything they've had to look through. Again, if you're just joining us, Stephen Hayes, 6 counts of death. Let me go through those again. 1, the murder of a sexually assaulted person, which was on Jennifer Hawke-Petit. The murder of 2 or more persons. The murder of a person under 16, which was Michaela Petit. She was only 11 at the time when this happened. And the 6th count being 3 are for the murder of a kidnapped person. 1 for Jennifer, 1 for Hayley, and 1 for Michaela.
So it's basically murder, kidnapping, rape. It's a combination of all of these for all 3 of these women. What are some of the things, Andrew, that stand out in your mind over the course of time? Some of the visuals or things that stand out in your mind?
Well, during the guilt phase of the trial, before we got to the penalty phase, you were struck by how horrible each day was. You would hear something or see something on one day and say, my goodness, I've never seen anything quite this horrific in a murder case. And we're talking about people, journalists here who have covered plenty of murder trials and are around this stuff. But just the way these crimes were executed, the brutality that was inflicted upon this family, there were pictures released of charred beds, of ties to beds, just things that you never really could imagine. And you knew that these things could happen, but when you heard the testimony about them, when you saw the pictures about them, it brought them into light in a way that made them real, that made you pay attention to them in a way that people really hadn't before.
And through all of it, Dr. William Petit, just the pillar, just the stoic man there, day in, day out, providing interviews to whoever wanted to talk to him. I mean, he's just such a tremendous human being. And he said numerous times that if this happened to your family, you'd be doing the same thing. He had to do it. He had to show up each day to show the jury and the world that he cared so much, no matter how difficult it is.
That moment that you just raised was really one of the moments of this trial that everyone will remember. That was after the jury voted to convict Hayes, and Dr. Petit came out and said, you keep asking me, like, how do I do this? And what he said was, this is what's left for me to do for them. That was a very powerful statement. That was a very powerful emotion that he gave. And I know that it made a lot of people stop and think. And
put themselves in his shoes.
Exactly. They put themselves in his shoes and said, yeah, I can see that. It's like this is what's left, to stand there by them because they're not there to stand for themselves. And when he said that outside the court that day, I think a lot of people stopped and paused.
He also said his wife always said, I pray to God that I can get through the trials and tribulations that he puts me through. And he said he thinks that she's looking down on him saying, you can do this, you can push through. And so it's just so sad to look at this man, but he's created this amazing foundation, the Petit Family Foundation, that continues to give back to the community, and he gives grants to different organizations. The Interval House, he had the race, which had a huge turnout this year. So trying to help other people when his life has been hurt so much.
Absolutely, and the girls were very much about that. They were very involved with fundraising, for MS and other causes that were close to them because of their mother's illness. So he's really carried on their work in a much wider way, of course, because he's got the foundation now. But he very much sees this, I believe, as a way to carry on the work of his family and the light that they brought.
And we are waiting to hear from him. He'll be coming out once everyone comes out of the courtroom, so hopefully he'll be speaking to the press as well.
So certainly a sigh of relief for him, if you can call it that, but still no closure yet, because